goodness. Thank you, Rob, for that introduction. I'm thrilled to be here at the second, hopefully, annual Service Summit. I'm particularly thrilled to be here in Gettysburg for a couple of reasons. First, on a lighter note, because now, every day after this, I can say the last time I was in Gettysburg was for the Service Summit and not for high school yearbook editing camp, which was the last time that I was in Gettysburg College. That's a true story. I spent almost a week here when I was 15 or 16, learning how to be, hopefully, a better yearbook editor. So I'm very grateful to the Franklin Project and the Aspen Institute, not only for bringing all of us here together today and over these few days to continue this important conversation about service in our country, but on a more personal note, because now my Gettysburg narrative has changed. I am incredibly grateful to General McChrystal, to Alan Casey, to John Bridgeland, to everyone at the Franklin Project and the Aspen Institute. I know events like this are truly team sports. So I'm sure you've already kind of thanked everyone and given a round of applause to everyone, but if you could indulge me and we could just give one more round of applause to the amazing team who brought all of us here today. Oh yes, and fist pumps and whistles are also appreciated. On a more serious note, I am grateful that we're at Gettysburg, given I know like I'm sure many of you, have spent the last few months since the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's famous address, not too far away, thinking about what it means to have unfinished business in our country. Clearly, for Lincoln, he meant more proximately the end of the Civil War, but in a more profound sense, he meant ever marching toward our more perfect union. At a moment in our history when elementary school children are projected to live shorter lives than their parents, and in which inequality is rising rapidly and opportunities are diminishing, I can't think of really a more urgent time for us to be having this conversation focused on solutions, and particularly focused on the next generation, than now, so that we can change what currently is projected so that our futures truly are healthier, stronger, more equitable, and more full of opportunity than currently are expected. Now, clearly there's a strong bias in this room. None of us would be here if we didn't believe that service was an important part of that conversation, and that helping to change the conversation around service is equally important. I think too often service is seen in a rhetorical way instead of in kind of the data-driven way that motivates so much of what we do in our daily work. We know that for every dollar invested in service, there's close to a $4 return. We know that service helps ameliorate youth unemployment, helps rehabilitate prisoners, helps ensure that young children are taught life skills as well as academic skills, and yet that's not sufficiently well known. And yet, even though we're not having the depth or the nuanced conversation that I know so many of us wish we were having at a national, state, and local level about why we need to be investing more in service, young people are raising their hands, stepping forward, and engaging in untold numbers. Too often, I think millennials are perceived as the me first or the selfie generation. Maybe it's inevitable given the amount of selfies that I'm sure so many of us take with the younger members in our family. Mark and I are thrilled to be expecting our first child, but while we wait for that happy occasion, we spend a lot of time with our 19 nieces and nephews. And yes, selfies are a big part of what we do. But again, the data doesn't really bear that out. Given that on every survey, whether it's the 2010 Pew survey that General McChrystal referenced in his Democracy Journal article recently, or whether it's more recent anecdotal evidence from multiple college and university surveys, we know that somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of millennials say that they've volunteered in the last 6 months. We know that for AmeriCorps in any given year, there are 7 to 10 times the number of applicants for spots. For Teach for America, it's 8 to 10 times. Rob mentioned the Clinton Global Initiative University. On a much smaller scale, for us, it's 5 to 7 times the number of applicants that we have for available spaces. So we know that the demand is there. But yet, it's not a national outcry for why the supply isn't meeting the demand, or why the expectation isn't there for every young person to figure out what the best way is for him or her to serve our country. Whether that's in an individual capacity, or clearly, as it's been for my family, a lifelong calling. And so that's what I hope the conversation that we can have today is about. How do we change the supply and demand sides of this equation? How do we ensure that there are even more opportunities for the young people who are raising their hands, who are stepping forward, who are continually defying this stereotype that too often overhangs the millennial generation? And how do we ensure that even more young people are inspired, motivated, and yes, even incentivized to serve? I think we have a tremendous panel to start to tackle some of those questions, and I hope that the conversation doesn't only occur on stage. So I'm giving you all fair warning. After I exercise my prerogative as a moderator and ask the first couple of questions, I'll turn to you, our audience. There's a lot of you here who know a lot more about this than even those of us on stage. A lot about what barriers still remain to ensuring that young people can serve, whether transportation barriers, whether barriers to sufficient rehabilitation and treatment and support for those transitioning out of the adult or juvenile prison system, for our veterans coming home, transitioning out of military service who want to go into civilian service. We also know that there's a lot of innovation, as you've already talked about here, happening at the local level, happening in places like the Clinton Foundation, happening at companies like Cisco. And so please help feed our conversation, fuel our imaginations, and ensure that when we're done in a little less than an hour, even if we spent more than the 272 words that Lincoln had to use for the Gettysburg Address, we're a little bit more girded in what we need to do to ensure that millennials have the opportunities that they're demanding, and that more millennials start demanding those opportunities. Thank you all for engaging in our conversation, and thank you all for being here. And please welcome the panelists to the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Zach Maurin, Executive Director of ServiceNation, Fagan Harris, CEO of Baltimore Corps, Rodrigo Garcia, Chairman of Student Veterans of America, and Mary Bruce, Executive Director of AmeriCorps Alums.
So this is a question for all of our panelists, but Zach, I'll start with you because you're to my left.
Okay.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
What are you most excited about now for young people in the service equation?
Well, first, thanks for being here and for all of your leadership at the Clinton Foundation and going back 25 years. It's amazing, and this is a really exciting panel, and I'm excited to hear from these folks as well. And I'll be quick, because you told us backstage you cut us off if we're not succinct. So
no, only if you were droning on.
Okay,
if you're
fair enough.
Then,
I do that at times.
Free.
So, well, I think right now there's a lot of talk here. A lot of people here have drunk the Kool-Aid about citizenship and a civic rite of passage. And I actually want to push back on that narrative and think that I don't think most young people think about citizenship or a civic rite in the sense of a civic rite of passage. But what excites me most is young people think deeply about how they can take ownership of their communities and how they can lead. They want skills, they want experience, and if we provide them the opportunity, there's no question they're gonna step up. So I actually think the idea of a civic rite of passage is the wrong marketing message, and the idea of skills and experience, jobs, leadership, and a pathway to a more successful, meaningful life is the best way. And I think young people want that. They're unemployed at double the national average. If you look at low-income populations, it's even higher. They need the skills as much as anybody, the experience as much as anybody. So that's what excites me right now. I think young people are going to answer the call. The question is, how is government going to step up? How is the private sector going to step up? And then how are we going to reach people, which I know you're doing a lot to help us on that. So we're excited for this moment. The question is, I think, can we bring together those resources and the different sectors that are actually going to reach people in a way that compels them? And I think we can.
And so building off of what Zach said, Fagan, we know that more than 70% of young people say that when they're thinking about choosing their careers, one of the most important factors is that that career will provide meaningful opportunities. Even if it's not quite clear how meaningful is defined, and probably there are different definitions for each person answering that question. How do you kind of marry that with what Zach is saying to ensure that there are sufficient opportunities, however that's defined, that are meaningful and then attractive for young people to engage in service?
It's a great question, and I think we can either be afraid of that kind of ambiguity or the bigness of people desiring to have an impact and make a difference, or we can embrace it as an opportunity for young people to really break down barriers and find new and creative ways to change their communities. We know millennials are sector agnostic, and so we should be thinking about service as impact across the public, the private, the social sector. We should be thinking harder about how we can harness social entrepreneurship as a vehicle for service. And I think we're beginning to see rumblings of that. That's starting to percolate up from the community. But I'm so excited by this generation and its desire to be entrepreneurial, to think of new models. It's so much of what we do at Baltimore Corps, to send people what we call the front line of social change. And these are incredibly inventive and new ways to change communities. And so I think Zach's absolutely right. Young folks, they have the skills, or they want to acquire the skills. They have the hunger for change. They may not think of it as service necessarily, but they think about it as impact, and they think about it as their responsibility. And so it's really about unleashing that, unlocking that, giving young people the tools to really take control of that narrative.
That's great. Rodrigo, what do you think about this conversation? And also, given I know you spent a lot of time thinking about this in Illinois, both Zach and Fagan kind of in different ways referred to the narrative around service. You know, whether it is having a broader narrative, to Zach's point, or sort of transitioning from service to impact. How important do you think that is for the young people that you interact with?
Yes, most definitely. So, well, I think that service is the highest form of patriotism. We need to be able to change the public narrative in the way that we view service, and ensure that those folks who are taking the time and the sacrifice to be able to provide service, whether it's in military service or in community service, that they're viewed as civic assets. And that we understand that these folks who are going out there, not only are they enriching themselves, but they are enriching their community. So we have to think that here in America, we have this intricate balance between the need for self-fulfillment and self-altruism. This need to ensure that we provide our families, that we provide those who we care for a future that is secure. But at the same time, we also have to understand that our own well-being is tied to the well-being of our communities and to our country. And so just like we help our communities, a well-enriched community also helps ourselves. And so I think we definitely need to move that narrative forward.
Clearly, I think we all agree that service is part of the continual replenishment of our social contract as Americans. And Mary, I think there are a few groups that could be said to have kind of contributed more to activating that ideal than AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps alums. So how do you think about kind of the AmeriCorps alum network as helping to tackle some of these challenges, but also capitalize on some of these opportunities, not only for themselves, but their own communities, whether that's their family or their schools, or more broadly, once they move from AmeriCorps forward?
It's a great question, and it's what Ben, my co-executive director, and I, and our National Council, we have many of our National Advisory Council members in the room today. It's what we think about every day. What we've talked about, we have real and pressing challenges. 1 in 5 children live in poverty. 1 in 2 children in many of our nation's toughest schools don't finish high school on time or at all. And we need leaders to address these challenges. And I think AmeriCorps alums, we think AmeriCorps alums are the pool of talent to be leading these issues, to be addressing these challenges head on. And what's most exciting to me is that millennials, I think, are often called emerging leaders. And the truth is, we're already leading. Like, look at this panel, they're amazing. Look, we have so many AmeriCorps alums and returned Peace Corps volunteers here today. We have an alum in Senate, we have mayors in the audience who's got their start in AmeriCorps, we have the heads of corporate social responsibility programs who are alums who got their start in AmeriCorps. We have so many alums they're made in AmeriCorps, and they go and they have incredible impact. And I think as our sector continues to grow, as this movement continues to grow, we're going to keep seeing that, and you can see that pipeline of leaders.
So I want to ask a question that I think sometimes is uncomfortable, but a crucial part of particularly this conversation about millennials, which is what should the role of government be, particularly given how skeptical, if unfortunately cynical millennials really are about government's ability to transform our world. And yet really, kind of only government could launch a program of AmeriCorps size. And so what do you think kind of the government's role in this is, and what do you think the narrative should be around ensuring that young people expect kind of government to provide appropriate opportunities without stumbling over their own cynicism? Zach?
Sure. Well, you know, part of the genius of the way AmeriCorps is set up is that all the sectors are contributing. And we're in a time when there's a lot of reason to be cynical. I'm actually deeply optimistic about the role of government in providing opportunities to serve, and a couple of reasons. One is where ServiceNation has invested in our grassroots work. In every state where we're in, whether it's conservative on the far right or liberal on the far left, we are seeing members come around when they understand how it works. And so that's not done through a lot of high-paid lobbyists. That's done through programs getting engaged with their elected officials, alumni, communities making the case. And the challenge is, how do we scale that movement, that constituency, so that there is movement politically? And I think that's one of our biggest challenges. So I'm actually deeply optimistic. I refuse to, and I will argue till tomorrow and beyond, to anyone who thinks that the government can't be supportive right now and that there isn't progress that can be made. There is no group, Americans Against National Service. So we don't have an opposition to this, right? So we can actually, it's been talked about, Stan has talked about this, the status quo and doing nothing is going to be our enemy. And so I actually am greatly optimistic. I think it is hard to motivate people to go talk to their members. They say, oh, what can they do? They don't get anything done. I think this is a unique issue that can actually get something, that can actually make progress, because it does have a bipartisan history. There's been consistent presidential support. But the challenge has been, AmeriCorps has made incredible progress. I agree, thank you. AmeriCorps has made incredible progress.
Interactive,
yes.
Also great.
But in the grand scheme of things, it's still incremental. The Peace Corps, I think, was twice as big in 1966 as it is today. It's not because these programs aren't working, it's because we aren't organized and demanding that they're bigger. And I think we can change that.
Yes, I agree. Mary, were you?
Yeah. I mean, I think the government isn't over there. The government isn't this thing that's over there. We are the government. We the people, by the people, for the people. And we have a role in that, and we released a survey today called Untapped Potential. We heard from over 5,000 alums in all 50 states. We learned that 3 in 4 alums strongly agree. Zach took the survey.
I'm very excited about the survey.
We learned that 3 in 4 alums strongly agree they want to have careers that change the world, and 2 in 3 are already working in the public sector. So what does it look like? I mean, Emily Cherniak, who's an alum, who's in the room, is running an organization that's trying to get more veterans, civilian and military, into office. So what does it look like when we mobilize, we get our folks elected on both sides of the aisle, but who believe in this idea of active, big citizenship, and then we are the government? I want to do that.
Well, I think you'd have a lot of partisans for that in a bipartisan way. One of the questions that we think a lot about at the Clinton Foundation is, how do we help kind of match people to what they want to do? So, I'm frequently asked by young people, like, what should I engage in? And I always say, like, well, what really makes you angry, or what really inspires you? Because those are probably going to be a more durable pathway for you staying engaged. But we also do try to organize meaningful opportunities through our Day of Action program, particularly in cities where either we work and serve or where we have big meetings, because we think that's part of our social contract, that if we're being hosted in a community, we need to give back. How do each of you kind of think about, in your own work or more broadly, trying to ensure that what opportunities do exist are democratized so people can find them? How do kind of young people, if you don't have a place like we do in New York City through the New York City Service Portal, kind of figure out what's the best way for them to engage, whether it's in a year of their life, 2 years of their life, a lifetime, or a weekend? How do you think we solve for that, so that everyone who is raising their hand is given an opportunity, even if it's not the one they maybe would want ideally?
I think there's a big social fabric, social connectivity issue. I mean, Robert Putnam writes about this a lot, and I think oftentimes it has to do with who your friends are, who your neighbors are, those informal networks. I didn't learn about AmeriCorps through by clicking, I don't know, we did have the internet when I was looking, even though it was over a decade ago. But I didn't learn about it on the internet. I learned about it because my sister's best friend had served in Vista. And I was like, oh, what's that? And nobody knew what it was. I was a senior in high school. I was discouraged to do it because everybody thought I should go on to college. I didn't want to do that and go into tons and tons of debt. And so AmeriCorps was a better option for me. But I think it has to do with addressing the fundamental question in all of our communities, which is how do we build connectivity and social fabric? And I think part of that is the identity of being a national service veteran, the identity of, I know I will always pick up the phone if another AmeriCorps alum calls me. I will look at their resume first. I did this long before I was in the job that I'm in. I know other employers in the room. I know other university officials in the room do the same. They see AmeriCorps, it means something because they're a part of a community that matters. And so I think the more that we can celebrate that and lift that up, and you're not someone far away, we had this common experience, and so we need to share those stories.
And so do you think it is kind of relying more on our high schools, on our churches, on our synagogues, on our kind of more conventional social networks to try to kind of mobilize and inform and even direct young people?
I think it's a really powerful complement. I think it's the networks, the informal associations are a powerful engine. They've always have been in this country. But there's also a really powerful alignment of interest here, especially in frontier cities like Baltimore. We've shrunk every year for almost 60 years. And yet, when young people who want a front door to service, when they can't find it, cities like Baltimore are missing out because service is a powerful on-ramp to bring talent and keep talent and cultivate future leaders for these places that so desperately need them. AmeriCorps and other programs bring 1,700 people a year to Baltimore. And there's so much more that needs to be done there. And if we keep doing that, cities like Baltimore, communities and places like Baltimore can grow. So I think we think about the formal structure, communities have a deep invested interest in this. And I think we've got to get away from service in a vacuum and start looking for alignment of interest. And I think there's really powerful combinations there to unlock.
Yeah, Rodrigo.
So for those folks who are not familiar with Student Veterans of America, we have an organization that has a footprint on 1,073 college campuses. These are chapters that are out there, not only in all 50 states, but in various countries overseas as well. And these folks, on an everyday basis, are providing public service to their community. Now, our chapters, they go from anywhere as 5% to as large as 1/3 of the membership are non-veterans. Means folks who are coming together with military veterans to provide public service to their communities, whether it's providing food for the homeless, whether it's going out and providing a color guard for a deceased World War II veteran, or it could just be to go to a food pantry and delivering food from a food collection that they did. And so all these small steps contribute to the larger narrative. So for those folks who are not familiar, and I'm pretty sure some of you are, with the etymology of the word idiot, and that means in Athenian democracy was every individual was born into a state of idiocy. And it was only through education and through public service that they earned their citizenship. So I think all of us together, let us not be idiots, but instead be citizens.
Zach, and how do you think our work together in trying to encourage screenwriters and showrunners for sitcoms, both kind of in conventional television as well as online, to make service part of their storyline, so that when, say, someone graduates from high school, instead of going to college, the character goes on to AmeriCorps. How do you think kind of that work that hopefully we're starting to make real progress on kind of plays into this?
Yeah, this is really, so in 1988, there's a professor at the Harvard School of Public Health named Jay Winston. He was in Scandinavia. He saw the concept of a designated driver, and he was crazy to him that why didn't this exist in the US? Went to Hollywood with really no knowledge of the industry, knocked on doors, would show up to writing rooms with pizzas. Fast forward 3 years, the idea of a designated driver was integrated into 150 shows, from LA Law to Cheers. PSAs were aired, and alcohol-related traffic deaths went down 30%. We've seen our sister campaign, Got Your Six, is changing perceptions around veterans to be leaders, not charity cases, through its work with the entertainment industry. The show 16 and Pregnant has been, research has shown that show specifically has decreased teen pregnancies by 6%. 1/3 of the overall decline in the last 20 months. So pop culture in Hollywood has an incredible, obviously incredible reach, and there's actually an opportunity to do some really amazing things. So we're working with the help of the Chelsea and the Clinton Foundation to integrate national service into into TV shows that young people are watching as a way to shift their behavior about what they're doing. So they see characters that they emulate and they follow and they adore. They see digital influencers, there's this whole new class of celebrities that really probably most of us don't even know their name, but 18-year-olds, 22-year-olds are glued to them on YouTube and on Vine and on Twitter, and they're doing whatever they say. And so we have an opportunity to leverage this new frontier and this fragmented media environment for good. I think we still have to figure out how high schools and colleges, they play a huge role. We also have to figure out how these cultural influences that have more reach than anything, any industry can really be harnessed to change behaviors and get this idea fully integrated.
Well, the last question before I open it up to the audience, how does technology fit into this? Both in terms of providing kind of new frontiers in a different way than Fagan used it for service, so that truly service becomes more democratized, that you can serve even if you're not able to leave your home, to how does technology help somewhat solve the challenge that we were talking about earlier of ensuring that people can find continually throughout their lives different and meaningful ways to engage. Thoughts?
I think it's an enabler, but it also isn't, it enables relationships to happen. It's not the relationship. So with AmeriCorps alums, there are almost 1 million of us across the country and around the world, which is awesome. And we're increasingly, our Twitter, our LinkedIn, our Facebook, they're growing incredibly quickly, and it's so exciting to see those relationships form online. But I think the real heart of it is the on-the-ground connection, is when you sit down and have a cup of coffee with someone, when a Corps member reaches out to an alum who's been out for a few years and says, how do I have the job that you have? And I think we're seeing growth in that too, but I think technology has to be the tool that gets us to something. Technology isn't the goal, it's the thing that's helping to support these relationships that are so important.
Particularly because millennials spend, depending on which study you're looking at, 6 to 8 hours a day online. So at some point, it's important to go to where people are.
Yeah.
To provide opportunities to what already is their literally native territory.
Yeah.
So Fagan, you're nodding.
I think technology is not just the medium. In some ways, it is the new service opportunity. We work with a program in Baltimore that teaches public school students how to code and how to do 3D printing. And that program's oversubscribed. And it's the biggest impediment is we need to bring more growth capital to programs like that. And so we work with service opportunities to make that happen. So when we think about service, it's not just hammer and a nail. Sometimes it's working with laptops and really meeting young people where they are, because those are the new tools. That's the new service opportunity young people
And that's also where the new jobs are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also add that I personally know several of our members who have provided coding and programming over the internet to not-for-profits in Latin America who are trying to set up their communication systems for the work that they're doing, and they're getting that public service in the United States from a laptop for several hours, per week, and that's how they contribute via technology.
Zach, what do you think from your grassroots perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the work of AmeriCorps alums is essential, because they're going to help connect this massive movement that's long overdue to be connected in a big way, and they're doing incredible work, and we need to scale that. I think the technology platform is going to be essential. And I think the surveys on the table from Roll Global about, there's 22 million unemployed. A survey was on of the unemployed millennials, 22 million, I believe. A quarter of them said they would definitely do a year of service. Technology is really the only way we're going to be able to sort of deal with that demand and then connect it, because if people just do a year of service and then move on, and we haven't figured out how to connect them during, after, throughout their lives, we've missed a huge opportunity about how do we build these communities. And it's one of the things that Teach America has done so well, is they've built this community of people who are working in policy, or working in government, or working in business, or working, in school leadership. And I think that's a good model for us to figure out how do we scale that across the idea of national service, because, go ahead.
But I was going to say, Zach, I know you're doing, we'll just keep complimenting each other back and forth along the line, but I know Zach is doing incredible work building community organizers on the ground to talk to members of Congress. And I think part of the challenge in scaling that work is we think about it in sort of a ones and twos. We'll have 2 chapters, and then we'll have 6 chapters, and we'll have 8. I want 1,000 chapters, right? Like, I want you to have organizers in every district, and I think technology is and has to be a part of that. If Rob Gordon, I learned the term from Rob Gordon, it's extensible. It's not just scalable, it's extensible. Like, how do we leverage technology for the goal of connecting people, connecting them to members of Congress, and building the work? I don't know if that's...
Yeah, and the last thing I would add is, if we come back here in a year, 5 years, and 10 years from now, I will, bet both my kidneys that
just one.
Anyone will bet one. I will bet both.
You can have one of mine. You can have one of mine.
No, I'm not going to eat it because I'm going to win the bet. That if we don't get the American people to own this issue, we are going to be we're going to be having the same exact conversation in 10 years, and we need technology to do that and to connect all the enthusiasm that we all know exists in a way that can really get the American people to embrace it. Because until young people clamoring for it, a poll doesn't indicate that they're going to go knock on their congressman's door or go raise money. It just indicates interest. But if we don't figure out how to get them excited about it, we're going to be spinning our wheels, and we're going to be having the same conversation in 10 years. So we have to figure out how to get the American people, both young people, as well as institutions, as well as their parents, as well as community leaders, to own this and to get excited about it. Because I think that's when philanthropy will follow. That's when politics will fall. That's when institutions will fall. When young people and the American people are owning this and clamoring for it.
And when there's an intensity. Questions? Yes. Or you can just shout. Or wait for the microphone.
Thanks. Rob Wilson-Black, CEO of Sojourners, and thank you, Chelsea, for helping us to launch the new social covenant last fall. My question is, how do we balance the importance and the need for cultural drivers from Vines and Facebook and celebrities, making it cool, television shows, service, with the concern that some folks have that, okay, it becomes the hippest, coolest thing, tipping point, you're trading up, and this becomes the chic thing to do. Well, then only the more wealthy, the higher socioeconomic, more in touch, connected, the kids of people here are going to be the ones getting those million slots. How do you balance that? Because we need both. It needs to become cool, but it can't become so cool that the first million, the second million, the third million are taken up. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, a real concern, and a real point of interest for us is when we think about the digital influencers in Hollywood, we aren't just going to we're going to all shows and all networks, the ones that reach the full demographics of the country. So we're thinking really deliberately about how we make sure that
and we're also talking to Univision and the Spanish language networks as well.
Yeah, so we're being very deliberate about that, because if we're only talking to shows that reach a certain demographic, then we've failed.
I think too, just to add to that, when you think about administration of those million positions, we've got to come back to first principles. And we got to think, how do we find great community leaders, not just great leaders come off campuses? And I think programs like Public Allies have been true leaders in this respect, and it's something that we all can learn from and really take to heart, that if we're not marrying the great talent that's in our communities in which we're serving with the great talent that's coming out of maybe more affluent or privileged backgrounds or college campuses or universities, we've missed a transformative opportunity, I think, to change things. Because only when those two forces are brought together can we really realize the promise of service. So even if we have 1 million people serving and it's all one kind of person, that's a pretty hollow service. Yeah. And then that doesn't mean nearly as much.
And I think we also can't rely on sort of the serendipity that brought Mary to AmeriCorps. I think that, Fagan mentioned earlier, we can't forget high schools in this equation. I think that to really ameliorate, even obliterate the challenge that you're talking about, we have to ensure that the opportunity is fully democratized. And kind of to think about going to where people are, I think there is a technology component to it. I also think there is an old-fashioned bricks and mortar component to it, to ensure that there isn't that sort of the self-selection that is discrimination by another name. Yes, right here.
Got a lot of thoughts and questions going through my head, so we're going to find out together what my question ends up being. But
I appreciate the honesty.
My name is Jamie Stacy. I'm an AmeriCorps Vista and Millennial. serving at Code of Support Foundation right now, and I've been here about 6 months. And I'm from upstate rural New York, and I come from a Christian conservative home, went to a small liberal arts college, and then wound up as a country girl living in DC. And I share that story because I have a very specific experience and narrative and background myself. And I think something that we're all trying to do is have more of a collective experience together as a country. And one thing that I see over and over again in the work that we do in bridging the military-civilian divide is living in the divide myself with a gap of understanding of the true experience of the military community because I am a civilian. And not only seeing that, but also seeing the spiritual and faith-based differences in the communities we're working in, or the economic differences, or the political differences, and how they divide us, and a lot of that is because of the backgrounds that we're from. And I think something that's different about millennials is we're the first generation that's had endless access to knowledge and experiences of different people. And something that's really cool about having a service here is getting to attempt to open up myself to those experiences of other cultures. Even I spent the majority of last week living on the streets of DC trying to be homeless to see what it was truly like. And the one thing I learned is that I can pretend and I can be isolated from the population that I'm from, but I'm still isolated from the homeless population because I'm not really there, because I'm not really homeless. So my question really is how do we overcome this gap in understanding so that we're able to identify with all of the different micro communities that exist so that we can be more effective in supporting each other and in moving into something that's more collective together?
Well, I think in some ways that's a question that's a complement to the question that was just asked. And so I think the question that you posed really has two parts. How do you ensure that young people like you want to understand kind of the myriad of experiences that exist today in our country and want to be part of trying to build a stronger collective? And then the second question is, how did the service experiences provided actually enable that? So, thoughts on either of those questions? Sure, Rodrigo.
So one of the questions I get asked a lot about is the military experience. How does that relate to the civilian-military divide? And I know that you can definitely advance that narrative just by, instead of just saying thank you, but by asking questions. You don't have to talk about questions about their military experience, but you could talk about questions about who they are, where they came from, what were their experiences before the military, after the military, what do they want to do in life? And by that, by taking that route, you begin to understand the individual, and then they begin to build a sense of trust. And then over time, you build that relationship, and then you begin to understand what motivates them, how they were molded in their life. And so for me, it's about communications and just building those relationships over time, whether it's the military or whether it's the homeless or poverty or any other community that you're trying to understand.
Mary. Yeah, and I think there's often more commonality than we first think there is. You're a Marine, right? So my dad's a Marine, and when I was little, I made the mistake once of calling him a former Marine. Don't do that. Once a Marine, always a Marine, and I learned that young. And I think in the same way, this service experience that you had that's so powerful is going to stick with you for the rest of your life, and that's now a part of who you are, and I think that's true for all of us. And when we say the AmeriCorps Pledge, we say we make a commitment to get things done, to make our community stronger, safer, and healthier, to get things done for America this day and beyond. And I think the same way my father says, once a Marine, always a Marine, I think once an AmeriCorps member, always an AmeriCorps alum. Once a returned Peace Corps volunteer, always the head of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps was saying, it ruins you. Once you do it, you're part of that forever. And so I think there's often, I think we do sometimes say veterans are over here, civilians over here, let's help each other, but we can, you and I think we both served overseas as well, and I think we share more than maybe we would first guess.
Most definitely. We created a bond right behind stage right away. We started understanding each other.
So the dignity of engagement.
Part of what you're getting at is empathy. In a University of Michigan study in 2010, empathy amongst college students is down 30% over the last 30 years, I believe. 34, it's something significant. This is, and I think you could add trust to that as I look at Rob Gordon, and who talks a lot about that. So I think part of what, as a country gets more diverse and we're less empathetic, and there's growing inequality, I think it's a big issue to figure out, because those dynamics, if they don't change, is really troubling. And it's part of I think the big rationale for why we need to dramatically scale opportunities for people who are different than one another to do things together.
And hopefully not only help with the general argument, but the argument targeted to millennials.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if your experience is representative, or at least your hunger for your experience is representative, hopefully by having this be embedded in the narrative, it will make service even more attractive, to Mary's point, not only for today, but for the future. Next question. How about, oh gosh, now so many hands. Yes, ma'am, right there.
Hi, my name is Janet Riggs. I'm the president of Gettysburg College. So first I just want to say welcome to all of you. I didn't do that to get applause, but thank you. Service is really woven into the fabric of Gettysburg College, so we are so pleased to be hosting this event and really honored to have all of you here with us. And Chelsea, by the way, you were here another time, but it must have been less memorable. You campaigned for your mother in this room.
Oh, I didn't. Wow. I'm sorry. Well, that changes my story, but makes it even better.
I think
now I have two memories, except being here on a tour with my parents when I was little, which is a positive one, and my yearbook memory, which was kind of a painful one.
Yeah.
But I did get the editor's job, so I guess going to camp helped.
Excellent.
But okay, duly chastened. Thank you.
No, I was just thinking the yearbook camp was definitely more memorable. My question really relates to a couple of panels we've heard this morning. The previous panel, there was a little focus on quality of the service experience and the need to be sure that the opportunities we're providing to our youth are of high quality. And then we've also heard a lot about competencies, preparation for the workforce that is gained by participating in these experiences. And I don't know, and maybe there has been some conversation about the development of common competencies, common expectations that we would all embrace if we were to move forward as a national movement. Obviously, different experiences would invoke different competencies, but it seems to me there are probably some overarching competencies that we would all expect. And I wondered if any of you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I know that even if this panel hasn't necessarily had thoughts, given that everyone's been quite loquacious until you asked that question, that there is work being done on this. And I know I briefly met someone who's here from Cisco. I know this is something that Cisco is thinking about. What would it mean to have a service badge that could be attached to any resume of someone who had completed a significant amount of service, whether a year or longer, and clearly to have something that could be unitary, it would have to have real meaning behind it. It would have to correlate to a specific set of skills or competencies, even if those were kind of more soft skills, but increasingly those that are very valued by employers: leadership, teamwork, resiliency in the face of challenges. And that badge would really denote those qualities or competencies had been achieved. So I know it's something that at least Cisco is working on, and I know that there are others who are thinking about it more, at least at a local level. So for example, I know in Little Rock, where I'm from originally, there's a conversation across different service organizations as to what does it mean if you have completed a year or two of service in Little Rock? What could then the city of Little Rock say to potential employers that the city was willing to stand behind, saying, we know that this group of volunteers this year certainly has qualities A, B, and C. So there's some local innovation, there's some kind of company-driven innovation in this area, but it is certainly an area of focus.
I think this external validators point is really important about the common expectation. Like Ben Dude and I, the 20, 30 AmeriCorps alums in the room, like we can say AmeriCorps matters all we want, but we need institutions like Cisco, like the mayor of Little Rock to come on board and say that. And I think Gettysburg College, I think universities have such a huge role in this. In our survey, we heard 2 out of 3 alums want to continue their higher education, whether going on to get a bachelor's or a master's or beyond. But we also know we have over $1 trillion of college debt in our country. So millennials are facing, as Zach said, double-digit unemployment rates and the burden of amassing huge amounts of debt, and we have amazing university partners. We have over 100 institutions that match the Siegel Ed Award, which has been $24 billion, I think, since the founding in 1994. That's great, but that's also not enough. You know, we need more. We have 100 institutions is great. I don't want to double that. Like every university in America should know that the common expectation of AmeriCorps is so powerful. Of course, they're going to recruit alums because they're the best talent, and return Peace Corps volunteers and veterans because they're the best talent you can get. And so I think that common expectation has to be internally driven, and our community needs, the millennials need to build that, but we have to have institutions on board and saying what you did matters. Veteran isn't going to fall off your resume. And I think AmeriCorps alums let AmeriCorps fall off their resume, and how do we change that?
Fagan? Sorry, Fagan and then Rodrigo.
Sorry. I think that's absolutely right, and I think that conversation definitely needs to be connected to a larger, broader conversation on workforce development in this country. And I know for us at Baltimore Corps, we're privately funded. And so to do that, we have to align with not just our host organization in the community, we have to align with the corporate sponsor that's underwriting the value of that work. And they're interested because the alums of our programs are prospective employees for these companies. And in frontier cities, these companies really want that kind of talent. And so it needs to be a larger, thoughtful conversation about how do we align the competencies and the skills development with the imperatives of the host organization, the imperatives of the private sector in this country, and then connecting that obviously to higher education is all the better. And I think if we do that, service is potentially a game changer, and it's potentially transformative. I think Wendy Kopp last night said that we haven't really figured out the education to workplace connection, and service is that bridge, but we've got a lot of work to do to figure it out.
Rodrigo.
I was just going to say that, you know, when you complete your service in the military, you are given a piece of paper that certifies what you did, how many years, and then, you know, a slew of other information. And so to be able to provide a similar certification for public service will definitely advance, you know, this proposition forward. And to be able to push this onto universities, where universities expect 1 semester or X amount of time in support of public service, you get 6 credits or 4 credits or 12 to 15 credits to be able to do this as part of your education, as part of the service to your country. I believe that also will advance, because ultimately, if it's 10 years from now, 20 years from now, to be able to go into an admissions office at Harvard, or go into an employment office at Google, or that you're running for office, and the first question says, where did you do your service, whether that was military or public service, I think that'll do wonders.
It's the DD-214, the form? The DD-214. Oh, I know we have Wendy Spencer and Jonathan Greenblatt in the room, so maybe we just need to have a meeting with the Corporation for National Community Service in the White House and say there have been almost 1 million of us. We need to formalize this so that you have that same motivation to say, here, like, I did this, it means something. I'd like a scholarship, please.
Well, and yes. And I think this is another area where technology could come into play.
Yeah.
One of my good friends, and I know others are also working on this, are working on algorithms to help translate that form into language that civilian employers understand. So that if there are if you've had a 20-year career in the military and you had 8 different jobs and you worked in 4 different divisions and you had these different ranks, you know, well, what does that mean that you can do in a civilian workplace, and what are the levels of commensurate responsibility to the vernacular that civilian workplaces often use that are not, you know, lieutenant or captain or major. So I think you should have that conversation, and then we should connect you.
You should come to that conversation. I would love to have you.
Thank you. Done. All right, next question. How about in the back? Yes, ma'am, because you're standing near a microphone.
Hi, I'm Meg Garlinghouse from LinkedIn, and I wanted to start with the obvious question, which I think is on everyone's mind, is, are Red Sox the new selfie?
No. The cleanest socks.
Okay. My more serious question is, so I work at LinkedIn, and we think a lot about marketplaces and connecting talent with opportunity at massive scale. And in my mind, there's absolutely no question that the demand for these service opportunities is enormous, maybe insatiable. And we see this on LinkedIn as well, because within your LinkedIn profile, you can actually include your service, and you can check a box, you're interested in doing more service. And so to date, more than 5 million people have added this section, and they highly, highly skewed to the millennials. But my question is related to the president of Gettysburg, is around the quality of these opportunities, like whether or not these organizations have the capacity to absorb this enormous demand. Because that requires capacity to be able to use these individuals in a really meaningful way, where they're put through a program and they have a meaningful output, is going to be absolutely essential as we build this brand of service, and that employers understand what it means to have gone through one of these programs. So would love to hear from the panelists, whether, are you concerned about that? You guys are the ones with boots on the ground, you know whether that there's a million more of these opportunities out there. Because if we do reach Tay's BHAG goal, I just want to make sure that there's places for these people to go.
Great question.
I think it's the next generation challenge for us as a service community. We think a lot about service, especially at Baltimore Corps, as a recruitment arm for organizations doing outstanding work in our most vulnerable communities. That's only part of the equation, because once you recruit them and onboard them, how do you train and develop them? And that's not just a challenge in the service community, that's a challenge in the social sector, even the public sector writ large. And so this notion of how do we prioritize human capital and human capital development and putting that at the center of the experience, I think that's a worthy challenge, and it's something that we work on every day. We aggressively partner with training providers and professional development providers to kind of overcome those challenges, but we've got a long ways to go there. I don't know, maybe you have more thoughts on the AmeriCorps dynamic.
You served in the Peace Corps, right? Well, first of all, thank you for your service. I think, and I served in the Peace Corps as well, and I think if you look back on the history of the Peace Corps, the first years weren't super organized, right? It was an experiment, but we did it because that's part of what America does, right? We have this big idea, we're going to do it, it's going to be awesome, and it's gotten better year after year. I served in Morocco, and I served in 04 to 06? Yeah, 04 to 06 in Morocco, and the program has changed a lot since I left. There were 4 sectors when I was there. They've now honed to 1 sector. Similar to City Year, they went from doing lots of things to really just digging deep on education. So I think it's going to be, as we grow, it's going to be sloppy, and it's okay to have mistakes because we have this big vision, but we also have 20 years of AmeriCorps, years of Jesuit Volunteer Corps to learn from, Peace Corps to learn from. We just need to make sure we're not starting from scratch. We have these great models to learn from.
And so maybe it's, again, both a substantive challenge to ensure that as these programs scale, which hopefully they will, kind of the quality remains, but also then a narrative challenge to ensure that that question isn't the kind of first one that comes to prospective employers' minds. Rodrigo.
I just wanted to make a couple quick points. As we're talking about the challenges, we're talking about in democratizing this movement is, number one, the debt load by graduating students is immense. And so when folks are graduating and looking at public service as an opportunity, these have these tens of thousands of dollars in student debt. So that is a major stumbling block that we have to overcome. And then the second one is talking about our Hispanic community. One out of every 4 children under the age of 18 is Hispanic. And so we also need to democratize in Spanish-speaking communities where we are able to go out there and not only to those who are documented, but those who are undocumented as well. We have 12 million folks here in the United States who can't go to AmeriCorps, who can't go to those opportunities, who want to serve. And I know that many times when I have AmeriCorps opportunities, we have to go and find alternative funding sources to be able to provide them that public service that they want to do. So I definitely understand, just like we said in English, we have to say, un año de servicio para la comunidad y para nuestro país y para nuestra patria.
Zach? Well, we're unfortunately at the end. There were so many hands up that we didn't get to call on. So I just urge all of you who raised your hands, or those of you who wanted to raise your hands but didn't, to find our panelists once we exit, so that this conversation doesn't only kind of happen on the stage, but continues. I think one of the big takeaways for me is that for the millennial generation, the service conversation can't exist in a vacuum. That it needs to exist kind of not only just alongside, but coherent with the conversation about student debt. Like 2013, the year when aggregate student debt in our country outpaced credit card debt in our country, is not something any of us should be proud of. that the student debt service conversation also needs to be equally aligned with the conversation about future employment, which goes directly to what Fagan was talking about earlier with STEM opportunities, that we need to ensure that it's not just us who are having these conversations, but that we find those who are focused on other areas that are intimately engaged with ensuring that all of this is solved, not just for millennials, but for our future. So that indeed, to the AmeriCorps pledge, we are healthier and stronger than it currently looks as if we are expected to be, and certainly, as I know we all want us to be into the future. Thank you to Gettysburg College. I now know I've been here 4 times, so I also learned that today. Thank you again to the Aspen Institute and the Franklin Project, and most of all, for this moment, thank you to our panelists and to all of you.